My heart pounded, wild and untamable, like a bird trapped in a cage of ribs, as I faced him. His face was a mask of indifference, a mask I knew all too well, a mask that hid the same cruelty I had felt as an 8-year-old girl, long ago in a room in Zagreb. Then, as now, the pain was palpable, but my strength had risen from the ashes of that suffering. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. It was summer, the air heavy with moisture and the smell of old earth. The sun beat down through the window, casting shadows on the dusty floor of the small room in my grandfather's house. I was only 8 years old. The innocence of childhood still clung to me like a mist. But on that day, that mist would be torn away. Luca, my older brother, was always bigger, stronger, somehow superior. My parents admired him, even though he was prone to cruel games. I was a quiet, withdrawn girl who sought refuge in books and dreams. My grandfather, his mind already clouded by age, would sometimes treat us equally, but more often he favored Luca, calling him my little heir. That day, Luca devised a game. He said it was a test of courage, whispering to me, with that false kindness that always preceded trouble. He lured me into the back room, where old, rusty things were stored. He pointed to an old wooden chest, full of sharp edges and a rough surface. "Get inside," he said. "You have to stay inside until I count to 100. If you move, you won't get the cakes that Grandma Marija baked." Grandma Marija's cakes were my little paradise. Sweet, juicy, full of jam, innocence, and sweets. The perfect trap. I crawled inside, my heart pounding with excitement and a little fear. The space was cramped, dark, and the air was heavy. The wood smelled of dust and age. Luca closed the lid, and I huddled inside. He began to count, his voice echoing in the silence of the room. He counted slowly. For too long, I felt panic grip me. It was dark, too dark. The wood scraped my knees and hands. I tried to move, but there was no space. I started to suffocate. The air was stuffy, and the fear grew. I started to cry, begging him to open it. "Luca, it hurts. Open up," I screamed, my voice muffled by the wooden walls of the chest. His answer echoed back, "Be quiet. It'll be over soon." He was only 13, but he was already a master of manipulation and cold-bloodedness. He continued to count, his voice devoid of any empathy. His words, so simple and cruel, were etched into my soul. I knew he would never protect me, that he would always choose his own amusement at the expense of my suffering. That was the beginning of a long series of injustices, the beginning of the realization that the world is a cold place, and that you have to stand up to it, even if you are just a fragile 8-year-old child. It was the pain that shaped me, the pain that ultimately strengthened me, turning me into the woman who stands before him today, ready for the final showdown. But the road to that strength was long and arduous, paved with tears and silent struggles, moments when I felt completely alone, at the mercy of someone else's cruelty. That scene with the chest was just the first cut, but it left the deepest scar, a reminder of how much Luca despised me, of how insignificant my feelings were in his eyes, and what's worse, in the eyes of my parents, who too often turned a blind eye to his actions, considering them childish pranks, while scolding me for my sensitivity. It continued. This was not an isolated incident. Luca had a special gift for finding my weak spots and exploiting them. In our family, Ivanka, our mother, always considered Luca her golden boy. He was everything she ever wanted. Strong, loud, self-confident, at least on the surface. I, on the other hand, was too sensitive, too withdrawn, too dreamy. These labels were like chains, holding me back and making me feel invisible. I remember once, as a 10-year-old, winning first prize in a school writing competition. I had written a story about a little girl who ran away to the forest to find her own voice, a metaphor I didn't even understand at the time, but which came out of me intuitively. I came home full of pride, with a diploma in my hand. I expected praise, a hug. Instead, Ivanka looked at the diploma, shrugged her shoulders and said, "Luka won a football tournament last month. That's the real deal. Anyone can write." Luka stood next to her, smiling maliciously. That feeling, the feeling that your effort and success are not enough, that you are always in someone else's shadow, was devastating. It became clear to me that in this house, in this world, I had to fight for every bit of recognition. Even seemingly small events became a stage for Luka's dominance. On Christmas Eve, Grandma Marija, who was the only one in the family with a warm soul, and who recognized my suffering, would bring me a special gift, a small, handmade doll, or a book. Luka would always make sure that my gift looked insignificant next to his, either by showing it off, or bragging about his new bike, or video game. Ivanka would smile at his pranks, saying, "That's right, Luka, show them who's boss." No one ever intervened. I was always the one who had to adapt, to suffer. I remember once when I was sick, Luka accidentally spilled soup on my drawings that I had spent hours working on. When I started to cry, Ivanka told me, "That's not how you treat your mother. You're crying over a little soup. I raised you to be strong, not a crybaby." Her words, meant to toughen me up, only deepened the hole in my heart. I realized I had to be strong, but not in the way they wanted. I had to be strong for myself, because no one else would be. That realization was difficult, but also liberating. I began to withdraw, to build walls around myself. I found solace in solitude, in long walks through the streets of Zagreb, in visits to the library, where books took me to worlds where I was valued and important. I began to dream of the day I would leave, when I would be free from the shackles of expectations and injustices. School became my escape, a place where I could show my intelligence and diligence without Luka's shadow. I studied, absorbed knowledge, not only because I loved learning, but also because I knew that education was my key to freedom. In every book, in every new discovery, I saw a crack in the walls that surrounded me. Slowly, imperceptibly, I began to forge a plan that did not rely on revenge, but on survival, and ultimately, on triumph. I knew that the day would come, when everything would change, when I would be the one writing the rule. But before that, I had to endure many more humiliations, many more silent battles, which only strengthened my resolve. Luka and Ivanka, with every action, unknowingly pushed me towards a destiny they could not even imagine. Every insult, every ignored success, was like a stone added to the foundation of my future, unstoppable strength. Life went on, but my position in the family never changed. Luka was always the center of attention, and I was a pale shadow, someone who was barely tolerated. My inner world was full of thoughts, plans, and unspoken feelings. I would often watch Luka brag about his successes, which were often the result of plagiarism, or someone else's work. My parents would shower him with praise, and I wondered if they ever noticed how empty he was inside, how his personality was built on a fragile foundation of lies and manipulation. My law studies were an act of silent rebellion. I chose a path that would give me the tools to fight, not just for myself, but for others, but primarily for myself. While Luka and Ivanka mocked me, saying it was a woman's profession, and that I would never be a good lawyer, I persevered and studied. Every page of law I read, every legal phrase I learned, was a step towards my freedom. Ivanka would often remind me of how much she raised me, with love, and I wondered what kind of love she had experienced. Her love was conditional, directed only towards what she considered valuable, and I was not that. Her words hurt me, but I turned them into fuel. Every time she told me, "You're just like your father," always in some books, it would remind me that unlike Luka, I had inherited something deeper and more valuable than material things, intellect and strength of spirit. Silent injustice became my daily life. There was my grandfather's old watch, a family heirloom, which I adored. My grandfather had promised it to me. One evening I accidentally overheard Luka bragging to Ivanka, "I told Grandpa you wanted it, Mom. That little Marija doesn't appreciate things like that anyway." My heart sank. I knew it was a lie. I had never mentioned the watch to Ivanka, but Luka said it with such ease, with such conviction, that I realized that for him the truth had no value. The watch ended up on Ivanka's mantelpiece, and I remained silent. It wasn't just a watch, it was a symbol of all the promises that had been stolen from me. I tried to confront Ivanka. "Mom, Grandpa promised me the watch," I said quietly. She looked at me coldly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Luka gave it to me. You're too young for things like that anyway. A person like that doesn't treat their mother that way." Blaming her for something she didn't do. Those words again were daggers. I felt like I was suffocating. In those moments, Zagreb seemed so big, and I so small and lost. I often sat on a bench in Zaranjevac, watching people, wondering if they too had such secret sorrows, such unspoken injustices. But that silent sorrow was not passive. It was building an iron core within me. I learned to observe, to listen, to remember. I began to understand the mechanisms of manipulation, the ways in which people are exploited. Luka was a master at it, but I was a student who was surpassing him. I didn't shout, I didn't argue, I just collected information, like a small ant carrying grain by grain. Every one of his lies, every one of his thefts, every time Ivanka belittled me, was an addition to my invisible file. I knew the day would come when that file would be opened. I knew that then I would be ready. The feeling of injustice was a constant companion, but at the same time a driving force. It was not bitterness, but a quiet, cold determination. I knew that when the time came, I would get back what was taken from me, not out of revenge, but out of a need for justice, for balance. Years passed. I grew into a young woman, a lawyer, with clear goals, and an even clearer memory of all the injustices. My grandfather, unfortunately, passed away. His death was sad, but it also awakened a sense of fear in me. I knew that his inheritance would be the scene of Luka's next game. My grandfather was never rich, but he had a modest house in Zagreb, in an old quarter, and some savings. For me that house represented memories, the home where Grandma Majija wove the most beautiful stories, and baked the best cakes. For Luka it was just property. The family gathering for the reading of the will was tense. The room smelled of stale air and unspoken desires. Ivanka sat stiffly. Luka smiled a little too confidently, and I felt a lump in my throat. I knew what was coming. Or at least I thought I knew. The lawyer, an elderly gentleman, with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, began to read my grandfather's will. My breath caught when I heard the first words. My grandfather had left everything to Luka, everything. The house, the savings, even the little things that were dear to me. No mention of me, no mention at all. I felt my world sway. I looked at Luka. His face was triumphant, barely suppressing a mocking smile. Ivanka nodded her head, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Well, that's it," said the lawyer, folding the papers. "There are no ambiguity." But it was very unclear. My grandfather had always said he would take care of me, that he would leave me my grandmother's jewelry box, a small plot of land outside the city. I remember him even mentioning that he had spoken to a lawyer. How was that possible? How could he have forgotten everything? Luka's sentence from many years ago echoed in my head. "I told Grandpa you wanted it, Mom." Had he done something similar now? Had he manipulated my grandfather while his mind was weak? The cold truth hit me like a slap. This was not a coincidence. This was intentional. Luka's intention. I looked at him, and he met my gaze, not hiding his satisfaction at all. In his eyes, I saw the echo of the 8-year-old who had locked me in the chest. His cruelty had no limits. I rushed out of the room, unable to bear the sun. There were no tears, just a burning emptiness. I walked to a nearby park. I sat on a bench, and the lawyer's words echoed in my head. Everything. Luka got everything. That moment was a turning point. There was no more talk of sensitivity. There was no more tolerance. Injustice had taken on a concrete, legal form. I felt as if the ground had been dug out from under my feet, but instead of collapsing, I felt something cold and hard awaken within me, something that made me stand up. This was not the end. This was the beginning of my fight. I knew I had to find a way, no matter how difficult it was. From that moment on, every step I took, every thought I had, was directed towards uncovering the truth and getting back what was rightfully mine. It was no longer just about my grandfather's inheritance. It was about my pride, my worth. I tried to talk, first with Ivanka. I thought that a mother's love, buried deep somewhere, would prevail. But I was wrong. Mom, is it possible that Grandpa really wanted to leave everything to Luca? He always said he would take care of me, I asked, my voice trembling. Ivanka looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, her face expressionless. That's not how you treat your mother, questioning your grandfather's will, she said. Grandpa was old. Luca took care of him. In his last years, you were too busy with your books. That was fair. Her words were like ice. Her loyalty to Luca never wavered. I felt a bitterness in my mouth. Her justification of Luca's actions was disarming. I had expected at least a shred of understanding, and all I got was condemnation. Next was Luca. I met him in a Consum grocery store, where he was buying groceries, with that oversized smile he always wore when he was hiding something. Luca, we need to talk about Grandpa, I said. His smile froze. About what? It's all settled. It's all legally clean, he replied arrogantly, putting a package of sarma in his cart. I doubt it was Grandpa's will to leave me nothing. You know he promised me things, I continued, trying to stay calm. He laughed, a short mocking laugh. You know Maria, a person like that doesn't treat their brother that way, doesn't try to take what's his. Grandpa loved me more. Accept it. That smile, that sneer was the trigger. In that moment, I understood. There was no one to talk to. There was no hope for understanding, for justice through family ties. This was a cold, heartless struggle for power and property. I felt a coldness inside me, the same coldness I had felt as a little girl, when I was trapped in the chair. But now that coldness was not a sign of fear, but of determination. I took out my phone and called a lawyer I had worked with on some pro bono cases. He was an older, experienced lawyer, Mr. Kovac, who knew family law better than anyone. Mr. Kovac, I have an urgent case. I need your advice, I said, my voice firm and unwavering. I met with him the next day. I told him the whole story, from the chest to the will. He looked at me carefully, nodding his head. So, you suspect undue influence on the testator, Miss Maria? He asked. Absolutely, I replied. Grandpa was old and sick. Luca took advantage of him. I suspect it was all set up. Do you have any proof? He asked. Not yet, but I know what I'm looking for, I replied. His eyes sparkled. Good, we'll need a lot of luck, and a lot of work. Luca and your mother won't give up without a fight. But if what you say is true, justice will be on your side. I left the office with new strength. I was no longer the helpless Maria. I was now Maria, the lawyer, ready to fight for what was mine. I knew the road would be difficult, full of obstacles, and emotional exhaustion, but I was ready. Because, in my mind, it was no longer just about my grandfather's house or savings. It was about correcting a long-standing injustice, about showing Luca and Ivanka that they couldn't trample on people with impunity, about showing that my "it hurts" had now turned into enough is enough. All my free time, every minute outside of work, was dedicated to planning. It was not an impulsive decision, but a carefully thought-out strategy. Mr. Kovac advised me, we'll need every little thing, Miss Maria, every message, every testimony, anything that can prove Luca's manipulation, or your grandfather's diminished capacity. I knew that Luca had often visited my grandfather in his last years. I also knew that my grandfather's dementia had progressed. But how to prove it? I started by searching through old family paper. I was always neat, unlike Luca, who threw everything away. I remembered that Grandma Maria kept a diary. Where was it? I rummaged through old boxes in the attic. Among dusty memories, I found it, a small worn leather diary, filled with my grandmother's neat handwriting. I started reading it. In it were records of my grandfather's decline, of his confusion, but also of his love for me, of the promises he made me. Today, Vlado forgot who I was again. My grandmother wrote, but he remembered Maria. Drawings. He says he'll leave her our old house, just so she doesn't have to worry. Every line was precious. My grandmother's diary was invaluable proof of my grandfather's intention and Luca's manipulation. Also, my grandmother mentioned Luca's demands, how he tried to persuade my grandfather to sign over his property to him. Luca came again, trying to get Vlado to sign some papers. Vlado was confused. He didn't understand, she wrote. My heart was pounding. This was gold. Then I remembered Nina, my grandfather's neighbor, an old, quiet lady who often came to visit. Nina was a witness. Luca often drove her away. I knew she would believe me. Her testimony could be crucial. I visited her. Nina, though old, had a sharp mind and memory. Luca was very rude to your grandfather, Nina said. Sitting in her small, neat kitchen, he threatened to send him to a home if he didn't sign everything over to him. Poor grandpa. He was so scared. Those words were like a thunderclap. Luca's threat, that was coercion. I wrote everything down. Every word she said. I also remembered the bank statements. My grandfather had a small pension. Luca was often at his place. I suspected he was spending his money. I asked Mr. Kovac to request my grandfather's bank statements. When they arrived, the picture was clear. Large sums of money, withdrawn from an ATM, often at Kungsholm grocery stores. On days when Luca visited my grandfather, it was clear that Luca was taking my grandfather's money. It might not have been enough proof for the inheritance, but it showed Luca's character and his willingness to commit fraud. My silent struggle was turning into concrete action. I was no longer a victim, but a hunter for the truth. Every piece of evidence I collected, every testimony, was like a stone in my catapult, ready to be fired. I felt powerful, not in an aggressive way, but in a quiet, unstoppable force. I knew that Luca and Ivanka would not expect this level of preparation. They thought I was weak, that I would back down, but they were wrong. I was ready. Mr. Kovac reviewed all the evidence. "This is a very strong case, Miss Maria," he said, nodding his head in satisfaction. "A case of undue influence on the testator and, it seems, financial abuse. We are ready for court." A feeling of triumph began to emerge. That feeling was not sweet, but cold and clean. A feeling that justice would finally be served. The letters were sent, an official invitation to a meeting with the lawyer, with a full list of evidence, was sent to Luca and Ivanka. I wanted them to know that this was not a joke, that my intention was serious and unwavering. Luca called, furious. "What are you doing, Maria? Have you gone mad? A person like that doesn't treat their brother that way, doesn't sue their own family. I raised you better." His voice trembled with anger, but I also heard fear in it. The fear he was feeling, for the first time in his life, that gave me strength. "I'm just asking for what's mine, Luca. Justice will be served," I replied calmly, without any emotion. I hung up the phone. Ivanka appeared at my door a few days later. Her face was pale. "Maria, please, drop this. You're embarrassing us. What will people say?" Her only concern was her reputation, not the truth. "Mom, this is a shame that Luca created. I'm just looking for the truth," I said. "She didn't raise you to go against your family," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "No, Mom," I replied. "You didn't raise me to fight. You raised me to be quiet and suffer." But I learned to fight. I closed the door on her. I felt strong, liberated. I was no longer under their control. The confrontation in court was inevitable. The atmosphere was heavy, the air filled with hostility. Luca sat next to his lawyer, his face frozen in a mask of contempt. Ivanka looked like she was about to collapse at any moment, her eyes full of resentment. Mr. Kovac presented our case, systematically and precisely. He presented my grandmother's diary, Nina's testimony, the bank statements. Every sentence, every document, was like a pinprick in Luca's defense. Luca tried to lie, but under Kovac's cross-examination, his lies fell apart. His arrogance turned into sweat and stuttering. It was clear that he had manipulated my grandfather. His lawyer tried to discredit Grandma Nina, to argue that the bank statements were irrelevant, but the evidence was too clear. Kovac elegantly refuted every one of their arguments. I felt as if a weight was being lifted from my back, the weight of long years of suppressed pain and injustice. All those words, "It hurts. Be quiet. It'll be over soon. That's not how you treat your mother. I raised you better." All of it was pouring over them, turned into evidence, into the truth. I faced Luca, looked him in the eyes, and I saw the same panic that I had felt as an 8-year-old. Now he was the prisoner, a prisoner of his own lies. It was bitter, but fulfilling. I did not feel triumphalism, but a sense of calm justice. The jury came out after a short deliberation. Voices whispered in the courtroom. When they returned, I felt my heart pound. The verdict was read. The will was declared invalid, due to Luca's undue influence on the testator. My grandfather's property would be divided according to the law, which meant that I would get my share, half the house and part of the saving. Furthermore, Luca had to return the money he had withdrawn from my grandfather's account. I looked at Luca. His face was red, with anger and humiliation. Ivanka burst into tears. My lawyer squeezed my hand. It was a moment when justice, finally, smiled. I walked out of the courtroom with a sense of relief, but also with a strange emptiness. The fight was over, but the wounds remained. Vindication was cold, but clean. There was no euphoria, just a deep, calm sense that justice had been served. Luca, after the court's decision, was no longer arrogant. His facade had crumbled. I saw him a few times in Zagreb after that. He would always avoid my gaze. His reputation was ruined among our relatives. They had all heard about the lawsuit and Luca's manipulation of our grandfather. Ivanka tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but her aura of the perfect mother had dissipated. Although she never apologized, her silence was louder than any words. She knew she had been wrong. I took my share of my grandfather's house. It was not a fortune, but it was a symbol, a memory of Grandma Marija, of the warmth I had felt there, of the promises that had finally been fulfilled. I used the rest of the money that I inherited to renovate, turning my grandfather's old house into a real home, my sanctuary. I kept my grandmother's diary and read it often, remembering her love and her quiet support. Her voice recorded on paper was a reminder that I had not been alone. I felt empowered. My vulnerability, my childhood pain, had turned into strength. They had not broken me, but had built me up. I was not seeking revenge, but the correction of an injustice, and I got it. My philosophy on life changed. I was no longer that little girl who was silent and suffered. Now I was Marija, a woman who fights for herself, but also for others who have no voice. I continued to work as a lawyer, dedicated to justice, especially in family law cases, where I could apply my experience and compassion. I helped victims of abuse and manipulation, giving them the voice that I had not had for a long time. My "it hurts" turned into "I hear you, and it will be over soon," into "justice will be served." I learned that strength lies in silence, in patience, in the tireless pursuit of the truth. There was no need for dramatic gestures or big words. My strength was in my determination. I realized that the greatest victory was that I had preserved my integrity. I did not stoop to Luca's level. I did not give in to bitterness. Instead, I transformed pain into purpose. My life, once marked by a sense of betrayal and invisibility, was now filled with meaning and pride. Sometimes, walking through the streets of Zagreb, past a Konzum store or Zrinjevec, I would feel an echo of the past, but it was no longer pain. It was a reminder of how far I had come, of how strong I had become. I lived my life, free from the shadows of the past, with the knowledge that I had survived, fought, and won, not because I was vengeful, but because I believed in justice, and in my ability to achieve it. That was my quiet power, my triumph.